Hey everybody and welcome. So today I want to edit an architecture picture and I'm going to take this raw file right here and I'm going to turn it into a picture like this at the end. And of course I'm going to show you every single step, every slider, every adjustment from start to finish. So to be honest, this is actually an HDR file. I stitched together two files to really get all of the shadow and highlight detail. But let's get started with the actual editing. By bringing up the shadows by a little bit, nothing too crazy, maybe just like 50. And also bring down the highlights by all the way 100. Because I really want to have all of this color and detail in the sky. So furthermore, I think I'm gonna make this entire picture a little bit darker and really rely on the local adjustments later on to make it look, how I want it to look. But also, I think I'm gonna bring up the white so there's at least a little bit of punch in this entire photo. And now the blacks, again, I think I'm gonna bring them up and also bring down some of that contrast because I want to go into the local adjustments to really fine-tune everything rather than just do everything in a very broad way here in the global adjustments. And clarity, now I do want to add a bit here, also vibrance, because there is so much color in here, and I do think that enhancing this could work quite well. Now color temperature is always a tough thing, because this was shot at sunset, and I could make it very, very warm here, but it really doesn't work that well. So personally, I prefer to go with kind of a bluish look, at least in this picture, sometimes I will switch it up. And then also add a bit of magenta in the tint. And then go right away into the split toning down here to add some warmth in the highlights. I know you probably have heard me say this like 100 times, but I really love this workflow. I really like to just have kind of the color temperature relatively blue and cool, and then go right away into the split toning and add color here in the highlights. And the great thing about the split toning highlights is that you can, you add colors more so in the highlights than in the shadows, and therefore it will really look a lot more natural, because naturally speaking, all of the color is of course coming from the light sources such as the lamps or the sun. Now that I want to do that is clear, but how much I actually want to add is kind of the next question. So I don't want to go overboard just yet, because I can always add warmth also in the darken burning process later on, but I just want to get kind of a nice starting point. And I do think about 37% here into the warm tones works quite well. And also I'm going to try out the shadows and the split toning to see if I want to add like a contrary color, or perhaps even kind of a red tone. And here I really don't want to go very far at all, maybe like 10% even. So just to show you from before any split toning to after, it definitely helps the mood and it makes everything a little bit less crazily blue. That being said though, if I see it right here, I do think, I'm just gonna leave it as it is in terms of the color and color temperature, and again go into the local adjustments later on. However, I'm going to go into the tonal curve to further adjust some of the brightness and some of the darkness here. And let's just bring down some of that highlight and bring up the entire lights by a little bit, really almost nothing. And then the darks, I don't think I can bring them up even further, so let's actually bring them down by a bit to add additional contrast. And the same, actually let's bring up the shadows, by a bit, because the shadows will really help to either bring up or bring down the very dark parts of your picture. And you can usually, if you have kind of a bright picture with very little contrast, it will make sense to bring that down, because it will really at least make some of dark shadows kind of dark and keep them there and add a very special kind of contrast that way. But of course you can also bring it up and therefore have a much less contrasty picture which is great for local adjustments later on. Now HSL tool, I'm just gonna try out the different hues for the blue here. For that, I'm just clicking on this little pinpointer, and then I'm gonna go over the sky and, you know, just drag up or down the hue, and that way it will automatically take the exact color that is there and change it accordingly. I really think a light blue works a lot better than kind of a darker one. And in terms of saturation, now I don't really wanna, yeah, maybe just a bit more into the blues, but really nothing too much. And luminance. Now luminance is really great to actually, yeah, if you go too far with luminance, then you will end up with something like this, and you can see yourself that it looks completely ridiculous and terrible. However, if you use it in a very small and not too much fashion, then you can actually make it look a bit better, as long, again, as you don't go too far. And I think I'm even gonna do this with these warm tones, just so the lights are even brighter. And actually, speaking of these lights right here, if you notice, the orange is kind of off, if you ask me. So I'm gonna go back to the hue again, grab this pinpointer, go over the oranges here, and just make them a bit, kind of bring them further into the red tones. And just to show you, again, we're nowhere near done yet, but to show you from the raw file to right now, I think it's getting there, and you kind of can see what I'm going for. It's not going to be something too vibrant or whatever, but I want to keep it relatively natural and kind of make it look as if it could come from an architecture catalog or whatever. I really want to keep it at least somewhat natural and not go too far into the contrast. Alright, let's go on with the editing here. And furthermore, the detail tool. Now for the detail tool, you always want to zoom in 1:1 so you actually see what you do. And then I really like to add sharpening. Now sharpening, of course, increases the sharpness. And the thing is, I shot this, I believe, with an 18-55 kit lens, this one right here. And it's not the sharpest lens, so you probably want to add a bit more sharpening than if you would edit a picture taken with an L lens or whatever. So I think I'm gonna go about 65, 70 even here into the sharpening. And again, if you would have a very sharp lens, then maybe just like 40. It also depends on the export format, because if you're gonna export a picture for Facebook, then you can add a lot more sharpening, because you won't even be able to zoom in and see all of this ugly, you know, over sharpened texture. But of course, if you're exporting this for like a large wallpaper or whatever, then you're gonna see all of that ugly grain and, yeah, this very unnatural look from this over sharpening. So don't go too far in the general step. You know, you can always go back and then add some more sharpening for the export that you actually plan to do. However, a very important thing is to just zoom out again and then hold down the Alt key and bring the masking slider to the right. Now this will show a white and a black mask as you bring that to the right, and white is everything that is going to be sharpened and black is everything that is not going to be sharpened. Now the reason why you want to bring this to the right is because if I show you right here, if you would have masking at 0, you can really kind of see the structure and the sharpening in the sky. Let me actually bring that to the 150 in terms of the amount so you can see it a bit better on video. And as you can see with masking at 0, it looks kind of grainy in the sky, and then bringing it to around 40, it really takes away a lot of that grain. You're probably not going to be able to see it that well in video, even if you're watching at 1080p, but it does make a difference, especially if you're, you know, really caring about the detail and quality of your picture. So just make sure that you don't have any, you know, untextured surfaces selected, at least as much as possible, so meaning all of the sky, the water. If that's black, then that's definitely good. But at the same time, you of course don't want to have, you know, all the stuff that you do want to have sharpened black either, so you kind of have to make a compromise here. Alright, so furthermore, noise reduction, I really don't think it's needed here. I shot this at, yeah, ISO 100, and there's not much noise in here at all. But what I will do is bring the color noise reduction all the way to the right, or maybe like 85. And the color noise reduction is a slider that probably a lot of people don't even use that much, or don't even realize the potential, because you can bring it to the right so much and still don't have any bad impact. But what it will actually do is get rid of the purple and the green sensor noise. And color noise is kind of something that you don't even notice that it's there until you actually see the difference from before and after. And if I go here into the shadows, I can definitely see some color noise. It's definitely not that bad here because I shot it at ISO 100, but by bringing it to 85, it just becomes much cleaner. And again, it doesn't have a bad impact. It's really not a trade-off at all. Just bring it to like 70, 80, and you're gonna be having a much better picture, much cleaner picture if you're planning to print your picture or really just do anything that shows the detail very well. Alright, now going a little bit further, lens corrections. Here I've actually already enabled both chromatic aberration removal, which just gets rid of the purple and green fringing, so not the actual sensor noise, but the fringing, which means like these lines that you sometimes have on some areas. It will just get rid of that. Looks a lot better. You know, it's very easy to do. Just click on the little box and it's done. Very, very nice to have. And also to enable profile corrections. This will get rid of some of the basic lens distortion as well as the lens vignetting. So just by enabling that, it really helps a lot to just make your picture more like it what actually was and less, you know, distorted and everything. So speaking of distortion though, into the transform tool. Now, because this is architecture, I really think I'm gonna spend a bit of time here in the transform. In this photo with so many lines, and you can really see it very, very clearly that it's kind of off and at an angle, because sometimes lens corrections doesn't fix everything. So for that, a great thing that I actually would recommend is just to go into auto right here and see what it does. And sometimes it will not get it quite right. For example, here, I think it kind of missed the horizon by a bit, but in terms of the sides, they look a lot better. From off to auto, a huge difference. Like, it's just much more professional looking. So you can also choose like level and vertical and full, so that will do it in kind of a different way. And I actually think that level, yeah, works a bit better here than auto, but overall I think I will have to go into guided, because yeah, there are just some things that aren't quite right with the auto and level settings. Now with guided, you will actually have the ability to drag a line into your picture, actually 2 lines. So the first one that I'm gonna do is on, yeah, let's just take this this line right here. I'm just gonna zoom in so you actually can see what I'm talking about. So by just zooming out, you will have the detailed view very heavily zoomed in, and I just want to make sure that I go on the left edge of this pipe or whatever, and then go all the way down, and also make sure I'm on the left edge. And then I can have a second line. Now you can either do that with a second vertical or also a horizontal line. The best thing that you can do is really just look for the longest line that you have in your picture, and of course you want to make sure that the line is actually straight, and then just drag the, you know, the guided line, I guess, right here, and it will straighten everything. So I think this actually does a pretty good job. Let me just see between off and auto and guided. I do think that guided, because I really could set all of my lines manually. It looks the best of all of them. Yeah, auto is just a little bit weird. It's a little bit weird in the right especially, but guided, if you don't have any auto or level or vertical, you know, if you try them out and they don't really work, then use guided. And especially in architecture pictures, it's really a great thing, and it's gonna make your picture look a lot more professional, from kind of, you know, distorted and not really straight to very straight and very professional looking. So going further now, effects. This is kind of tough. I don't really want to add vignetting because, again, I don't want to go too far into the artistic side of things here. but rather just make this picture look as good as possible. And further, we would have camera calibration, which is the last global adjustment in Lightroom. So here you could change the camera profiles, and this is only an option that you have if you're working with a RAW file. But what it will do is simulate the JPEG style of your in-camera look, but it will not convert it into JPEG or anything. It will really just make it look differently in terms of the hues and everything. So a thing that I would recommend is just to go through all of them. It's really impossible for me to say to go to this one individually, because every picture and every situation is so different here. And of course also it depends what you like. For example, as you saw here, camera landscape is crazily vibrant, and camera portrait, I actually really like camera portrait here. But let's see, Adobe Standard versus camera portrait. You know, it really pronounces the sky a bit more, and it makes the blues, of course, a lot lighter. So I really actually like that. And yeah, it looks so much better compared to Adobe Standard. And you know, I think this is a really good point to speak about, because sometimes you will edit a picture and you will change colors and everything very detailed, and you will spend a lot of time there, but at the end you still don't know what you're missing sometimes. So that is a great thing. By going into profile, it will really change up the color completely, and sometimes you will just end up with something with a look that you haven't even thought about. It's worth your time, worth your like half a minute to go through all of these profiles and actually look what they're doing and go with whatever you like best. You could also do this at the start, but I actually prefer to do it at the end of the global adjustments, because then I already have an idea of how I want my picture to look like, rather than just having the raw file and kind of doing something that won't have such a big difference to the final picture, if you know what I mean. Now further, you would have a lot of, you know, the primary color sliders that you could adjust, and let me actually do that real quick and really get everything how I want it to look in terms of the color. Again, I really like kind of the light bluish tone here rather than the dark bluish tone. And if you don't know, the primary colors will just adjust your, well, primary colors. So if you change the blues, you will also change the greens and the reds, because they're mixed out of certain amounts of blues. And you know, it's really tough to say again what you should do here, because every picture is so very different. And I would recommend you just to go, you know, move the sliders a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, and see what they do. But at the same time, a thing to note here is that if you go crazy into either direction, it usually will not work, or it is also kind of easy to go overboard. And you know, I mean, if you really like this super artistic look, go for it by all means. But again, if you want to just edit your picture but not go completely into the crazy artistic side, you don't want to move around these sliders too much, generally speaking. Alright, so I think this looks pretty good in terms of the global adjustments. Now, just again, a comparison from before and after. I have to say, I really like how this turns out so far, and it's really close to what I've imagined. Nothing crazy, nothing overly saturated, but a very natural and kind of professional looking architecture picture. Alright, so let's go into the local adjustments, and local adjustments are of course all of these adjustments that will actually just affect, you know, stuff locally. So let's just say I would add a filter here, invert the mask by the way, and you know, just make one part very bright. I'm not gonna do that right now, because dodge and burning is always something that I prefer to do at the very end with the rail filters. So let's actually get started with the graduated filters here. You know what, before I actually do that, let's just see in terms of the cropping. Now, cropping is not technically something I would recommend you to do at the or towards the end of your edit, because if you do some local adjustments or add vignetting in the effects tool, it can actually really, you know, hurt and set your picture off if you crop afterwards. But here, yeah, I do want to crop it like this. You know, just a bit more panoramic, not a real panoramic aspect ratio, but just having a bit less distracting foreground, because let's be honest here, the main attraction is these lamps that lead you into the picture and then the houses and the sunset behind. Alright, so now with the cropping done, I'm gonna add some graduated filters. And graduated filters are great to just add a very big adjustment over a side of your picture. So for example, you can make an entire side very dark. You can make it, could drag it all the way up here. You can make it very harsh. So the transition from your darkness or whatever effect to the rest of the picture is very abrupt and not very smooth at all. Or you could really make it super smooth and make it huge. And there are so many options here, and what I want to do here is just, let's grab a new one and add a bit of minus exposure for the bottom. And I really find that minus exposure helps a ton to close out the picture, meaning making, just having less attention on certain areas. And again, because I don't want to have a ton of attention on this bottom area, I want to decrease that even further with the minus exposure. And I messed it up completely here, but luckily you can just press Ctrl C and it will undo your previous adjustment. So that's really nice too. If you just messed up, just press Ctrl C and you're fine and ready to go again. Now with the sky, it's already kind of naturally there, because of course the sun was somewhere, setting right here. And as you go further upwards, you will have a very light blue going to the medium blue, darker blue, to a very dark blue at the top. If you would want to enhance that even further, you could of course do that with the graduated filter, but again, I don't really think it's necessary here. Instead, I will add some further minus exposure towards the right, as well as one to the left. And this is really to add, custom vignetting and add atmosphere, but at the same time, I don't want to go too far with any of these. Alright, so I think this actually looks pretty good. And just to show you from before the graduated filters to after, some pictures will of course have a much bigger use and necessity for these filters than others. But here it's really just kind of a fine touch that I think works really well. Now, the last thing that I usually do to a picture is the dodge and burning. There is really going to be a ton of opportunity for dodge and burning. So dodge and burning is of course making individual parts either darker or brighter, but I'm actually also going to mix them with a bit of contrast, both plus and minus, as well as with some clarity to, it's all about differentiation at the end. You want to have, of course, nice colors that look great as they are, but the more differentiation from like bright to dark, to different colors, to different hues of the colors, it's really what makes your picture truly interesting and brings them to the next level. Because a very dull, very monotone picture would just not be interesting. And of course, you want to keep in mind not to go too crazy, because you could of course very easily, just add a ton of warmth like somewhere. But yeah, let's get started here with the dodge and burning. Now for dodge and burning, you can also use the adjustment brush for it, but you don't have so much control. You cannot make your feather, so the area that it takes from the actual adjustment to the blending in of the rest of your picture, you can't make that quite as big as with the rail filter. And also, if you, let's just say you want to have a ton of exposure here, I'm over exaggerating to show you actually what I'm doing here, and you want to have something right here, if you just add a lot of strokes of this, and then you want to change something, for example make it darker, then you will affect all of these brush strokes that you've done previously. So you would have to add one, then go to new, add another, go to new, and it's really not as easy, not as convenient, and just not as good looking as the rail filter can be, in my opinion. But at the end, it's definitely up to you what you want to use dodge and burning with. But again, I'm going to use the rail filter here. And with the rail filter, you want to make sure that you invert the mask, meaning that if you do an adjustment, it will actually be within the filter, otherwise everything outside of the filter will be affected. Now, you might want to use that if you have a portrait and the background, you want to just make that brighter. It can be very easy and fast to do it this way, but for dodge and burning and most channel filter stuff, you definitely want to invert the mask. And also feather, by default you will have that at 50, but you want to bring it all the way to the right, because that way you can see, even with such a crazy plus exposure adjustment that I would never do to an actual picture, you can see that it blends into the rest of the picture very naturally, whereas if you would have it at 50 it would be harsher, and of course moving it further and further down all the way to just a very harsh filter without any soft feathering at all. So bring that all the way to the right to 100 and invert the mask and you're ready to go. So I'm gonna start off with a completely new filter here, and I think I'm gonna go into the plus exposure first. And you know what, I'm just gonna add a filter here, and the great thing is that you can adjust all of these settings, all of these sliders as you wish. But I would recommend you to go into the plus white, mix with some plus exposure for plus exposure dodge and burning, because it just looks a lot more natural than just going into the plus exposure. And also, I want to mix in a little bit of contrast, and I think I'm gonna add some warmth here as well. You could add color or color temperature here, of course, in the color temperature slider, but you could also go into the selected color and, you know, add all sorts of color, even kind of warm tones if you want to further specify anything. But a little bit of color temperature into the warms works just fine here. So with this basic filter, again, you could really adjust all of these sliders and do a very complex dodge and burning, but actually a lot of times simpler is better. So okay, so the thing with dodge and burning is you really have to enhance everything but not go against the lighting scheme. So you don't want to go over the darkest shadows, add a ton of plus exposure, because you would notice that it looks terrible. It just isn't what you want. So instead you want to keep it at least, you know, somewhat natural. Of course it depends on your editing style and preferences, but I think, you know, just going over this wall, which is already, you know, more into the bright parts as it is into the shadowy parts, and just enhancing some of that exposure is really what you're going to benefit the most from the dodge and burning. And let's add another one over this wall just to add a little bit of complexity and interest over an otherwise very large and kind of monotone area. And the great thing about these rail filters, you can just right click duplicate and move it around to wherever you want, resize it and change all of the adjustments, and then it will only be applied to the actual filter that you know, make the adjustments to, and not to all filters previously, as you would have with the adjustment brush. This is kind of a thing that takes a little while to really go through all of the areas and also try out some things, because sometimes you might just want to drag around the filter and suddenly you find a spot where it actually looks great. So take your time, really go over some smaller areas as well, not just huge filters. And again, keep in mind what the lighting scheme actually looks like. Don't go overboard, and really just enhance it, don't over edit it. Now I even want to make this, especially the middle here, a bit brighter, so I'm actually going to add quite a big one right here. And then let's duplicate it and bring it into the sky. And this is a really great example for why you want to adjust these sliders constantly, because here the same amount as worked perfectly down in the water just is completely overkill for the sky. So I'm just gonna further enhance some of that. And you know, you can also add differentiation in the sky colors even more with the rail filters, which is actually something I'm gonna use this for at least a little bit. So adding a bit of warm tones, and then I'm going to resize this filter to something that is much smaller, and again going a bit into plus exposure, and definitely also add a bit of contrast. Then let's add another one, this time just with minus exposure, nothing else. I don't think, maybe a little bit minus highlights, because minus highlights can work well in balancing out again the exposure together, without making it underexposed, but still have the highlights actually being taken care of and decreasing them. So going to the minus exposure with minus highlights is a great way to go about it. And let's add another completely new one. So I can actually just add one over the top right. And I'm doing that not for any exposure right now, but really just for the color blue, because I want to have this differentiation in the hues from the light blue to the medium blue to the dark blue that is already naturally there. And I just want to enhance that and make it even more crazy. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Now, again, with darkroom burning, it is really something that takes a bit of time. And the thing is, I think, you know, I'm not going to spend too much detailed, you know, I'm not going to zoom in here for this video. But you can do all of these things, but usually speaking, if you spend like 3, 4, 5 minutes, then you're really going to have a lot of darkroom burning that will enhance your picture by a lot compared to how it looked like before. You might not notice it that well if you just see, you know, one filter at a time, but believe me, once I go into the before and after any darkroom burning, then you will be really amazed if you've never seen the true power of darkroom burning before. And I think I'm gonna add another filter here. Here we kind of have some of these green tones. So let's further adjust the size and add just a bit of darker orange here, perhaps a bit more into the red tones even. And that's a great thing about this. You can add small, you can add big filters, you can add color or contrast or clarity or exposure. Everything is possible here, and you have so much flexibility. Now further, I think what I'm gonna do is just add a bit of minus contrast in a very big filter, as you can see here, and also add a tiny bit of minus clarity and add it over the middle. So that is so the middle and the distant objects are not quite as sharp and as pronounced as the close ones are. This again creates depth and makes it look a lot more natural as well. And with it, I think I'm also gonna add some kind of smaller ones, but now with plus contrast and plus clarity, and just add them over some of the areas here in the very near foreground. And you know, I think just a few more filters and I'm gonna call it a day here, because it looks very close to how I've imagined it. The last thing I'm probably gonna do is some minus exposure darkroom burning, because even though the plus exposure is much more exciting, the minus exposure can help very much in not making your overall picture too bright and too kind of blown out. Because even if you have just some areas that are actually dark and contrasty, it will make your entire picture look a lot more contrasty, but in a very special way. I mean, I'm terrible at explaining this, to be honest, but believe me, by just having a few negative exposure rail filters in some parts that are actually dark, and you enhance those with the filters, you will really help you and save your picture, because it is vital that you also have some dark parts and not everything just very bright and warm, because again, it's all about complexity and differentiation. So another one over here, and I think that looks pretty good. And you know, with that, I'm just gonna say that I'm done with the darkroom burning and all of the rail filters. Now here is from before any, and here is after. I might have to fine tune some a little bit, but in general, I think this looks so much better, so much more alive and punchy. And as long as you don't go overboard, you can really add a lot while not decreasing any naturalness at all. So let's go a bit into the minus exposure for this one real quick. Again, invert the mask, fill feather at 100, because that was just a bit too bright. But yeah, again, from before any darkroom burning to after. With the darkroom burning being done, that also means that the entire picture is done. Now, a thing that I like to do at the very end is just to go back to the basics and kind of see if I want to change some final things. For example, here, maybe just a tiny bit more vibrance and also a bit more magenta into the tint. Again, nothing game breaking, nothing crazy different, but just sometimes once you've edited all of these things, you might want to go back and just change your overall color saturation or whites or exposure or whatever. So I like to do that as kind of a last thing. But yeah, with that, I'm really gonna say that I'm completely done here. Now let's go into the history, and this is really a long history that's been a very in-depth edit as well. But I really like to do these occasionally because sometimes you can just, okay, so this is the raw file of course, and it looks completely different, don't you think? And here's afterwards. I don't know about you, and again, it depends on your editing style, but I really like this picture at the end. But yeah, what I was saying is that you really can show so much more in a long edit, and that I like to do them occasionally additionally to, of course, the faster edits as well. So thank you very much for watching. Now probably as you can tell, this is an entire new setup and everything here, so also a new microphone by the way, and I'm very excited about this. Now I don't know if it actually works, if you like this screen or if it's just kind of distracting. And yeah, just let me know anything, if you would change anything about the colors or this stuff right here, the fake plant by the way. Yeah, just leave them in a comment down below. I would really appreciate that, and also, you know, any feedback about the sound or about the lighting or whatever, because yeah, I'm just trying to make everything look as good as possible. So again, thank you very much for watching. You can watch 2 more videos right here if you would like to, and you can also subscribe to see more videos that I upload in the future. But yeah, have a wonderful day, keep editing awesome pictures, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care.